This episode is a part of our series to unveil the venture capital industry. Check out our other episodes and stay tuned for more. Dr. Kanu Gulati is a partner at Khosla Ventures, investing in enterprise applications and infrastructures that leverage machine learning, deep learning, NLP, language models, as well as robotics and autonomous systems and hardware acceleration. She has led and helps manage KV's investments in companies including PolyAI, Wabi, Zandar, Zordi, Lexion, and so many more. Kanu has more than 10 years of operating experience as a research scientist at Intel and Cadence, and was a founding or early engineer at a number of startups. She obtained a PhD and master's degree in electrical and computer engineering from Texas A&M University and a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the University of Delhi. Kanu also earned her MBA from Harvard Business School, where she was the co-president of the annual Venture Capital and Private Equity Conference. Hi, welcome to Learn Tech Talks. I am your co-host, Cynthia.
And I'm your co-host, Leon.
Today, we're joined by Kanu Gulati, a partner at Khosla Ventures. Kanu, welcome to the show. Where are you dialing in from?
I am very excited to be here. Thank you. I'm in the Bay Area. I'm calling from my home in Redwood City.
Awesome. You have an impressive career track record, so there's a lot to cover on the show, so we'll get started right away. To start, I wanted to go back to the very beginning of your career journey. You studied computer engineering and even got a PhD in it. What originally inspired you to pursue a PhD in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did my undergrad in computer engineering. I worked at a startup in the space called Electronic Design Automation, or EDA. And then when I started doing my master's, one of my first internships was in one of the top research labs at the time in the EDA space, where really a prerequisite to work in the industry in research at the time was a PhD. And in order to fit in industry in that research lab, I wanted to understand, which areas should I continue further doing in. And what's really interesting about EDA, or electronic design automation, is it's a very complex collection of a variety of very, very interesting algorithms, which are valid even today with AI techniques. So the field itself is very, very interesting, even though from a commercial point of view, it has not seen as much excitement as, say, AI. But the core technology, algorithms, capability, etc., is just amazing and very, very rich. So that's why I decided to do my PhD in computer engineering.
That's super cool. And after your PhD, you became a research scientist. When did you realize that you didn't want to continue down the research field anymore and that you actually wanted to go into venture capital?
Yeah. So, Intel and NVIDIA funded my PhD, and I'm very grateful for them. I was an NVIDIA graduate fellow, and then post-PhD, I joined Intel in one of their in-house EDA research labs called Strategic CAD Labs. And I was working on hardware acceleration of libraries that are used for designing Intel's chips. Around that time, I happened to attend a talk by John Doerr, where I learned about venture capital as an industry or a separate asset class. I then discovered that Intel has an investment arm called Intel Capital, and I was just very curious. So I hustled my way into learning more and became a technology diligence resource for them. And this is where I was, just inspired to explore more about venture capital. I then decided I want to go to business school to explore this further and also get a better sense of where on the spectrum of technology plus finance do I want to be. Could it be like doing my own startup? Would it be, incubating very, very early stage companies, more, Series A through Series C, D, venture capital, private equity, all the way to public market investing. So that's what I did at my business school, is exploring this entire spectrum of technology and finance, because once I got the taste of it, it was just super exciting and super, this is one of those areas we can continuously keep learning. That for me was very, very exciting.
And how did you navigate, being perhaps a generalist investor right out of business school from HBS versus, going into a specialist field, leveraging your previous background?
My first full-time job in venture capital was with a seed stage firm called Zeta Venture Partners. They were focused. It was one of the earliest firms that focused on AI. They're still around. They're still a good firm. They were seed stage and called themselves the intelligence investment, focused on that industry. So enterprise putting, seed stage, so 1 to 2 million to 10 to 15% ownership. And they were only focused on data analytics and intelligence. So it was not really a generalist role. I was focused from the very get-go in this area. During business school, I had done a summer internship through a cold email with my current firm, Khosla Ventures. And even at that time, we were very focused on just in advances happening in machine learning and in hardware acceleration. That's what I spent my summer between year 1 and year 2 at business school. And then, about 6.5 years ago, I came back to Khosla Ventures, and here I focus, like you said, on enterprise applications that are leveraging advances in AI. I focus on the infrastructure all the way to hardware acceleration, and I look at robotics, autonomous systems, and components thereof. So I'm very focused on these categories as opposed to being a generalist investor. Yeah, the thing I wanted to add was the space is moving very, very quickly. So, let no one fool you. It's not because I have a PhD in a certain point in time in a particular, set of technologies that I just know everything about AI. Like, no one can. The pace of advancements here is so high, it's so fast that everybody has to keep up. I think because of the technology background, it gets some help in being able to cover what's happening new, but it's a constant work. It's not an easy amount of work in keeping up with everything that's happening with AI.
Yeah, of course. And I think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of rapid change within the field of AI. So I would love to deep dive into your investment thesis there before circling back to the other side of focus for you, which is robotics and hardware. So starting with AI, Khosla Ventures was one of the earliest backers of OpenAI, I believe long before GPT even existed. Were you involved in any of those discussions? And do you recall what convinced the team to invest back then?
Yes, I was involved in those discussions. It was a non-trivial decision. We were considering putting a 50 million check, which is more than twice the, it was more than twice the single check we had ever put in a company in the first check. So it was a non-trivial decision. And at the time we were considering it, no one had proven that at scale of these, transformer-based models, there are these emergent qualities that can be demonstrated in terms of, how well these models generalize and how fluent they get in language, etc. Like, no one knew about this. I think our decision-making rested more around, we knew the technical team here really well. We were big fans and friends of Ilya, Greg Brockman, Scott Gray, and the technical team they were hiring, and we knew they will continue to hire, was just very, very inspiring. Vinod, I can't say but Vinod knew Sam Altman really well from his previous companies, from his time at YC, and having him at the helm gave us a lot of confidence about the trajectory for OpenAI. And really, I think above all, I would say it's more of a Khosla Ventures and, led by Vinod Khosla himself, is that mentality that, hey, the asymmetrical return on an audacious vision such as AGI, you will lose 1x your money if you invest, but you can possibly gain 100x if things work. That really drove the decision because, it was a great team going after a very ambitious vision. And we knew it would take time to prove it out because the challenge was just super high. So yes, it was a non-trivial decision, but it was really fun to be in those discussions. But yeah, I wouldn't take it away from Vinod. It was his call.
And that's awesome. Fast forward to today, I think we can all say that, well, I can speak for myself that ChatGPT has made my education journey a lot easier. And I can speak for many of our classmates that we're very grateful for its existence. As you look forward, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about infrastructure and enterprise applications with sort of like this AI enabled element. Where do you think are the biggest opportunities the current AI systems will unlock for enterprise applications and infrastructure?
So I think there's a lot of opportunity in applications of AI. In the enterprise, for instance, almost every functional role, almost every task can be rethought and must be rethought given the power of LLMs now is known. And what should this newer stack look like? One easy way to think about it, if there is a language kind of task, which a lot of the enterprise, white collar jobs are, there is a language type of task and it needs reasoning and increasingly more complex reasoning. These models are just amazing at that and are only getting better. There will be other dimensions along which they will continue to get better, like multimodality, etc. But that is where a lot of the confidence comes in because that's where we have seen these models really shine. And so we have investments, for example, in automating recruiting, automating sales, SDR's role. We have investments in automating the workflow within the organization around, starting with the in-house legal or in-house counsel. We have automations in voice-based customer service. So each of these tasks are now being rethought or reconfigured based on what an LLM first strategy should look like. And we've been very, very active in all of these areas. So there's a ton of opportunity. And I think I'm just talking about enterprise software because that's what I focus on. But I think even at the GDP of the country, I think there's a lot of impact in different industries like healthcare, sustainability, energy, fintech. I can't think of a single area where LLMs will not have an impact.
Yeah, for sure. I think conversely, there's also a lot of intense competition amongst these AI startups now. Pick any workflow as you were mentioning, and there are definitely a handful of startups aiming at using LLMs to make those workflows better. So, as you think through making investments, how do you differentiate perhaps a startup that's just quote unquote being a GPT wrapper versus ones that will actually have sustainable competitive advantages over time?
Yeah, this is a question we constantly talk about internally and refine our answers and our thinking. This is an ongoing dialogue. It's a non-trivial question. The way we think about it is internally, we have a nomenclature of what we call a shallow versus deep AI. Shallow is generally, it's very easy to build a quick demo because, yes, you're largely using the value provided by the underlying foundation model. Versus in deep, you are carefully thinking about what is the experience that you want to provide, which set of data, siloed data often in the enterprise should you integrate with, which workflow are we impacting or changing, and then also, another axis is you don't want to just build off the capability of GPT 3.5 or 4 today. You want to have a sense of where, newer things like, say, multimodality will enable capability and then build for that world. So you're building for like 2 years from today or 3 years from today, what should exist, and therefore what experience can I build? So being just very, very thoughtful, starting from the experience all the way to how data is integrated, how workflows are constructed, becomes very, very important. So we think about this deeper integration, which we think takes longer to build an initial demo or an MVP, but over time the defensibility is much greater. The other axis along which we also evaluate these companies is we don't always need an AI person like an Andrej Karpathy who can come up with a new, transformer-like model, but we do need people who have a good intuition on understanding where these models do well and where these models can fail, so that when they're building a enterprise-grade production quality system, they can build the right guardrails so that the models and their known limitations can be better mitigated in terms of they're biased or they're hallucinating, etc. So we think very, very carefully about the team that's coming in and how they will think about building the right guardrails. And one other role, in addition to the experience, the product experience, the core AI capability, etc. There's another is there's a team today or can hire someone who can think about the infrastructure, because they can be very easily, you can lose a lot of capital in running tests. These LLM calls, etc., can become very expensive. Directionally, they're all trending down, which is great. But even today, when you're either fine-tuning a model or say, there's a core, there might be some companies that might make sense for them to build their own models, the costs can be very, very high. So thinking about an infrastructure leadership that can handle and keep these costs low while you're running these experiments becomes super important. So we try to also think of a more complete team in terms of understanding the buyer experience, understanding the technology stack and the infrastructure stack.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you think about the next unlock for the AI technology itself, what would be a prediction you have around where the next biggest unlock will come from?
Yeah, this is another piece of conversation we have often at Khosla Ventures. We are obviously big fans of OpenAI, and we continue to believe that foundation models are here to stay because they're just so powerful. But we haven't stopped there, right? We're exploring what's around the corner and taking seed bets on these companies. And I think one of the areas we are actively betting on is there'll be some interesting, intelligent ways of combining LLMs with other types of AIs. Could it be symbolic, probabilistic techniques, or other such approaches? So you're already making bets in these areas, seed stage bets, high risk, but high reward bets. But we think some combination of these types of intelligences will unlock the next big step jump in AI.
That's super cool. And that almost bridges to the other side of the house that you focus on, which is, robotics and hardware acceleration. So I saw a recent presentation you made, and in it you shared a perspective that I thought was really interesting, where you said the moat in robotics is also in the AI and the software stack. Could you tell us a little bit more about that statement and how you think about the moat in robotics?
Yeah. So we at Khosla Ventures, we have a pretty big robotics investment portfolio. We are very actively investing in a lot of different form factors, shape factors, humanoid robots, bipedic, quadrupedics, just machine tending robots, etc. So it's a very, very big portfolio. So we constantly are looking at, ways that companies in the robotics area can be defensible in the longer term. So yes, the initial choice of hardware, whether it's built in-house or taken off the shelf, can have an impact. But we think in the longer run, you want to work with more increasingly off-the-shelf hardware components, which are easier to purchase, don't have supply chain constraints, etc. But the real value will come from software. Already increasingly there are low-cost robotics, less precise hardware available from Asian countries, and the software in turn can now fill in those gaps of the lower precision because of AI. And we really value that. Also for robotics, a testing framework that needs to be built or the simulations that needs to be run, if you're running them in the real world, it can increasingly become very, very expensive. Like Waymo reportedly spends more than $1 billion every year in just collecting the data from the physical world. So increasingly, we tend to gravitate towards companies that are trying to surpass or trying to get around that challenge by, say, learning and simulation. So one of our investments is a company called Vabi, which is an autonomous highway trucking solution. And they have already announced 4 pieces of software, like they call the Wabi World, which is the best-in-class simulation software for autonomous driving, especially targeted on highway driving. And they have a Wabi Driver, which is the agent that is now, is being trained in running those simulations. And we think being able to be simulation first and learning in simulation, et cetera, can give a huge advantage. That is what we increasingly mean by, the defensibility or the moat comes from the software stack in robotics, because AI has such an important role to play here.
That's awesome. And I think I'm really curious about, I think for hardware, it's notoriously difficult to build and it's a very long journey to build, as you've mentioned. When you think about advice that you give to hardware founders at the earlier stages, how would you advise them to get a sense of product market fit as quickly as possible?
I think with robotics and hardware, obviously, there are multiple risks that you want to retire. With every startup, depending on the company, depending on the stage, there are just a different set of risks you want to prioritize. The overarching guidance we provide to our companies is, think about chewable, like bite-sized risk. Think in terms of, 6 to 12 months, definitely under a year, or definitely under 2 years, with a clear and preferably quantifiable milestones. The key thing is understanding, why is this the next best set of risks to retire? And why does this put the company on a different trajectory if retired well, as opposed to, trying to retire a risk or any risk. Most startups are basically a sequence of just retiring risks, but the order or the prioritization order of risk retirement becomes key. And it's the same thing that goes even for deep tech. And there the risks may take longer to get to a product market fit kind of de-risking. Maybe the initial risk is like, can this even be built in lab? Can it be shown in a constrained lab environment? And then the next risk can it be scaled at a particular, like in real world environments, even though constrained. So being very carefully deciding which are those, think of like a series of experiments you have to run, and carefully reducing the amount of constraints on those experiments over time is the way we think about it. But yes, these should be, like not more than 6 to 12 month goals at a time, because otherwise it becomes super hard to manage them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, it's interesting that you mentioned this risk framework. I think it's something that you've also mentioned in previous presentations, is something that you look at. I'm curious how this risk framework applies to you as an investor as you think about what risks you're willing to take on versus not.
Yeah. One, like I said, for every company at the stage and the domain they are in, the risk changes. It's a very company by company analysis that we do. Okay, for this company in this stage at this time, with this, known about the market or these unknowns, what are the risks and which order should we think about retiring them? It changes. For me personally, as an investor, I am more open to taking technology risk because I tend to have a sense or, more conviction about what I feel can be retired and known in the next 6 to 12 months. So taking technology bets makes it just easier for me because of my background and the kind of friends I hang out with from folks in AI and robotics. And, sometimes the conviction that this market either exists today or the conviction that this market in a near time, like in the 3 to 5 year, maybe up to a 7 year, will be large enough becomes equally important. If we can't convince ourselves that in the next 5 to 7 years, which is a venture's investment horizon, then it does not make sense. So for me, it's more in the 5 to 7 years. But my firm, Khosla Ventures, for example, will take on even deeper bets. Our investments in Commonwealth Fusion Systems is longer than a 5 year bet. Those are, the impact technologies like that can have on the world are so huge that we probably focus less on the time frame or is it in the next 3 to 5 years, or is it more like, if this works, how large can the impact be? And yes, even then, we try to be very careful about what are the milestones, intermediate milestones that we can get past, that we can then earns us the right to raise the next round, to let the company survive, to see the fruits. So it's all about the risk retirement framework. Even both in our initial diligence and on ongoing follow-up investments, we always try to have that lens for a company.
Kanu, we've talked a lot about investing. We'd like to talk to you about another important part of your job, which is after the investment, supporting founders. How do you think about your role as a board member? When do you lean in and when do you let founders run with it?
Yeah, this is also a topic that is very carefully discussed at Khosla Ventures very often. I would love your listeners to read an article written by Vinod Khosla back in 2013, which I still think is very, very relevant today. I think it was titled something like Venture Assistance, a philosophical view of what boards should and should not do. And I try to take a lot of my guidance from, of course, ongoing conversations at the firm, but also from this article. We think it's a big honor to be invited to be on a board, right? Because you want to earn the right to be able to mentor or advise an entrepreneur. And it's not something we take for granted. I think for me personally, the biggest way I would like to assist an entrepreneur is helping them anticipate challenges. Whether things are going poorly or wonderfully, I think being blindsided by a challenge can be a make or break for the company. So being just anticipating challenges, I think that's the number one. And then really pushing them towards the biggest, baddest vision that can be had. And then that in turn affects everything from hiring to thinking about a product roadmap to thinking about the markets and thinking about different aspects of each of these, but really pushing the entrepreneur to become the biggest, baddest vision that can be had for their company. I think those are the two key areas. We are very aware that, as just investors or partners or board members, we never know more about the customers or the customer conversations or the real dialogue that's happening or more context to give answers to the founders. What we can do is help them, again, prioritize the key questions we should be answering at a particular time frame, and then use our network to help them both assess and hire the best quality talent that we can, and then trust the process. These people with those questions in front of them, they will come up with the right answers. I don't think it is a board member's role to have all the answers or can, because, typically, at least in the areas I work in, no one has built a company with that technology in that market before. So no one can really know all the answers. But it's, pulling up your sleeves and going after the biggest, baddest vision with the best team that can be had.
It's well known that most startups fail. What's the biggest mistake you see startups make? Is it what you talked about, like not going after the biggest vision? Is it not focusing? And are you able to convince founders ahead of time not to make these mistakes?
It's an ongoing dialogue, right? Again, I want to remind you that it's not like as a board member, I have a crystal ball and I can see all of the challenges. On the, focus or on the growing side, I think there has to be a balance, right? Companies can fail because they hire too fast. So before the product market fit was fully evident, they decided to hire a very big go-to-market team. That's a very, very common mistake that founders do make. But I also think, on the other hand, not being bold enough or aspirational enough in hiring, because, they undermine the kind of people they might be able to attract, I think can also hurt them. That changes the trajectory of the company, especially in the initial stages. That's where KV's, Khosla Ventures, or my sweet spot is seed and Series A. I think hiring really, really brilliant talent changes the trajectory of the company. So I think companies can make mistakes by not being bold enough or aspirational enough in their hiring. So those are the kind of key advice that I go with, especially when it comes to recruiting.
Why are founders not aspirational enough in hiring? It sounds like you should hire the best people. What's at play here?
I think it's a combination of, being stingy with your equity. because it is expensive, right? I mean, you're working hard and you don't want to give away equity. But at the same time, the interesting talent, the very high, exciting talent that you would want to bring in, you may have to give them more equity than you would for another less aspirational talent, so to speak, right? So that's important for entrepreneurs. And I'm not saying that it's trivial, but I think, they have to sometimes be reminded that the trajectory changes in the companies, the pie increases for everyone if you bring in the right talent. That's sometimes one. And other times, people want to just work with who they are comfortable with, the people in their network, people who they've already known, have worked with in the past. And not always they might be the best talent. They could be, if they've seen excellence before, they could be. But, oftentimes for my companies, when they're hiring their first, say, a VP of engineering, I'm like, let's aim for getting Jeff Dean from Google. Why not? Right? I'm not saying we can, but let's start there, right? And we will use everything in our power to convince them to join us. And then let's go down that stack, So just being very, very aspirational. And I think that will impact the trajectory of the company. And most founders don't automatically think about that, hey, can we even bring that talent away from a FANG company, for example?
What's the single most important KPI that startups should be looking at?
If I have to pick one, it would be let's not run out of cash, because that will result in the end of the company. But other than that, I think it's very case by case dependent. I cannot say there is one KPI that just works for every startup at every stage in every sector. It's very case by case. But yes, let's not run out of cash.
I think we'll move on to some rapid fire questions. We challenge you to answer these in less than 2 sentences, but sometimes they require more explanation. As Cynthia and I wrap up our MBAs, this is particularly relevant. What's one thing you wish you did or you're really glad you did during your MBA?
I'd say 2 things, exploration, both for travel and for my work. So by travel, I meant, every opportunity I could get to travel to a different country, especially when we were hosted by my classmates from that country. I don't think I would have gotten that opportunity anywhere else. And having this amazing, just itinerary planned for us. So travel for sure. And then I had, like I mentioned before, I was at business school to explore where in the intersection of technology and finance I want to work. And I did everything from an IP or an independent project with Warburg Pincus, which is late stage. I took a stock picking class to understand public markets investments, and I worked with a startup during business school that I eventually joined. That's one out of MIT. So that entire spectrum of exploration, I think I'm really glad that I did those 2 things.
What's the best book or article you've read this year?
I just finished reading the book, The Man from the Future. It's about the, John von Neumann, who's one of the most brilliant scientists we've ever had, and really about the impact he had on every different sector, everything from game theory to quantum mechanics to just a variety of different areas. And the sense behind the book is, hey, he must have been from the future, and at the right time, just sprinkle the right kind of research ideas to advance humanity in all of these different verticals. That was just a super, super interesting book, and also structured in a very nice, like topic by topic, like game theory, quantum, the atomic bomb, etc. So it was just a really fun read.
Great. Is he the same person that I think came up with a computer system?
That was one of the computer architecture. It's a von Neumann architecture. Yes, that's just one of his many, many contributions to science.
That's awesome. I'm actually taking a class in computer systems, and we had just learned about the von Neumann architecture. So we'll definitely give that book a read. What is your wildest bet about the tech industry in 10 years?
This one's really hard because internally at Khosla Ventures, we often debate about a variety of different technology bets. I think Vinod has published 10 of his predictions, wildest bets in the next 10 years, 10 to 20 years thing. And I think the one I resonate the most with is having non-technical people being able to build applications which are at the quality of what technical people can do today. We think the next billion developers are going to come from non-technical fields because how easy AI and softwares like we've invested in, like Replit, enable that. And I think that's just wild, but also the path you're going to go towards.
Awesome. And finally, what is the best career advice you've ever received?
I think there I'd like to quote a Sam Altman write-up where, one of the comments somewhere in the article was like, when you're selecting your next project or the next career move, he says, I always wanted to be a project that, if successful, will make the rest of my career look like a footnote. I really aspire to that, So I think that's just a brilliant piece of advice, especially for this audience as they're thinking about their next steps. Yeah.
That wraps up our podcast for today. Kanu, thank you so much for being here. Clearly, the future of technology is moving faster and more exciting than ever, and you've given us a great overview of that. And we look forward to following Khosla Ventures in the years to come.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. Thank you for having me.